afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you're joining us from this day. Thank you for joining us for this interesting webinar session. For those who've been coming for our previous webinars, thank you for coming again. And for those who are new to us, we hope to see you again. Today's session is on psychological first aid. My name is Dr. Lina Digolo, and I'm a senior associate working with the Prevention Collaborative. Just for the sake of those who've not interacted with us before, the Collaborative is a global network of practitioners, activists, researchers working to better equip ourselves and others with the vision and skills necessary to end violence against women and their children. For this session, we'll be discussing PFA, that's the psychological first aid, which is an evidence-based approach or supportive response to a fellow human being who is suffering and may need support. We'll hear from experienced speakers who will help us understand what PFA is, how we can use it to support those who are experiencing it, or those who are working with those at risk, or those who are working with survivors of GBV and that are at risk of vicarious trauma. Next slide, please. So before we start, we'll just take you through some of our webinar etiquette. I'm sure most of us are now familiar with this since we've been having very many webinars in the last few 2 years. But just for getting us on the same page, we'll be using couple of things, and I still see there are a number of people joining us, so I'll just give it a moment just to allow our participants to join. So for the time being, I would suggest that we keep introducing ourselves in the chat box. Please tell us where you're joining us from, your organization, your name, and where you're joining us from as we wait for the participants to come in. Thanks, Joy from Kenya. I can see Tanya. Thank you, Raj. Keep introducing yourselves as we allow participants to join us. I can see people still coming in, so let's give them a moment before we start. Thank you, Benita. Thank you, Erin, for joining us. Delin from South Africa, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Matt, joining us from Nama Wellness Center. I can see Patrick from Nama Wellness, thank you. Sophie, thank you for always joining the sessions. Christy from the World Bank, Nepal. Charity from LVCT Health, nice to see you. Patricia from Hires, thank you for joining us. We're just giving it one more minute and then we will start, allowing our different participants to join us. Thank you, Nicole, for joining us. Lynette from Kenya. Can see Annette and Ratna from VSO. Thank you for joining us. So thank you people for joining us, and thank you for your patience as we waited for the participants to join. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Lina Digolo. I'm a senior associate working from the Prevention Collaborative, and I live in Nairobi, Kenya. The Prevention Collaborative is a global network of practitioners, activists, and researchers working to better equip ourselves and others with the vision and skills necessary to end violence against women and children. And this is why you're seeing a lot of our webinars really working towards this vision. And today we are lined up a very exciting session for you that we will be talking about psychological first aid, which is an evidence-based approach or supportive response to a fellow human being who's suffering and may need support. So we are looking forward to a very interesting discussion from a experienced group of speakers who I'll be introducing shortly. Through this webinar, we'll be able to understand what PFA is and how it can be used, how you can use it in your place of work or just in your general life as you meet individuals who either have gone through a certain form of trauma and may need the support. So just before we get started, I'd like to just remind us a bit about our webinar etiquette and some of the tools that we'll be using as we go through this session. So first, you will be able to ask your questions. If you look at your screen, down on your screen, we have a Q&A icon. And if you have any question anywhere through the webinar, please just click that icon and type in your questions. We have people monitoring the questions, and we'll ensure that the speakers get back to you either through the chat box or verbally. We also will be using a tool called Mentimeter, and this will be used by one of the speakers in session. And once we get to that session, we will alert you. A link will be put in the chat box, and once you click on that link, you'll be able to follow the instructions that will be given to you at that moment. So look out for this during one of the speaker sessions. We will be recording this meeting, and the purpose of this is so that we have it available for those who would have liked to join us but were not able to join today. And it will be available on our website once it's ready. Please continue introducing yourself. I can see people doing that already. Use the chat box to write your name, organization, and country. We'd love to know who's joining us, and we're excited to see all the new participants and people who keep coming for our session. So welcome for this exciting session. And I'll just go ahead and introduce our experienced panelists to you. So today we have 3 speakers who will be talking about their experiences using this approach, the PFA, as professional psychotherapists or non-professional first responders. Our first speaker will be Lyndsay McLean, who's a senior associate working with the Prevention Collaborative. Lyndsay has over 25 years professional experience in research, program design, and evaluation. And she's done a lot of work around technical assistance, training, facilitation, and policy advice in international development. She has over 15 years focusing on gender equality, gender-based violence, and women's empowerment. And today she'll give us an overview of PFA and why it is important in our work and daily lives. And she'll also come later and give us her experience on using this approach as a first responder when teaching and training GBV at the university and in other spaces. Then this will be followed by 2 quite experienced speakers, Pauline Picho Keronyai, who's a public health practitioner working with Nama Wellness Center, Community Center. and she's the executive director there. And she'll be joined by Jacki Nakazzi, who coordinates the NAMA Wellness Community Center's mental health activities. And the two will talk to us about their vast experience using the PFA approach in supporting GBV survivors at this wellness center. So I'll hand over to Lyndsay to start us off, and we'll proceed with the other speakers as follows. Over to you, Lyndsay.
Thanks very much, Lena, and welcome everybody. It's great to see so many people here from different countries and different partnerships that we have around the world as well. So if I could just have the next slide, please. So first of all, I just want to give an overview of the session today. So Lena's talked us through it, but as she said, I'm going to just briefly talk about what is psychological first aid and why it's important in our work, whether we're doing response or prevention work. As you heard, Jacki and Pauline will be taking us through a case study of their work in Uganda as professionals in this field, as professionally trained mental health workers. And I will then give a brief case study about being a first responder when teaching and training on GBV as a non-professional, as a non-trained professional with some basic trauma training, but I'm not a professional psychologist or counsellor. And then there'll be plenty of opportunity at the end for sharing and to answer the Q&A and the questions that you're putting in the box and sharing your own experiences as well. Okay, next slide, please. So just before we start, we thought it would be a really good idea to just get those of you who are participants here to reflect a little bit on your own experiences. All of you here have worked in various ways on violence against women as in response and prevention, and probably also had experiences of colleagues or friends or people you've been dealing with suffering some kind of distress or trauma, which may or may not be related to violence and discrimination that they have encountered, or basically listening to the experiences of somebody else. So basically there's, if you can see at the top of the page there, and also there's a link in the chat box. So Tanya's put a direct link, if you can press on that link in the chat box, to Mentimeter, or you can go to, on the slide here, you can go to menti.com and use the code, so menti.com, and use the code 64105356. And that will also get access to Mentimeter. We've got two questions. We're going to first of all give you a bit of time to respond to the first question. So what we'd like you to do is to think of a time when a friend or a colleague, or it could even be a client or a participant in one of your programs, was in distress. What approaches do you think worked to get them the support they needed to recover? So it could have been approaches that you tried or you witnessed somebody else trying. So what do you think really works when somebody's in distress or is quite traumatized in order to give them the support they need to recover? So if I could just give you a few minutes, and you'll see as you're typing, you should see that some of your answers are coming up on the screen. So we're just going to give you a couple of minutes to write some thoughts. And if you're struggling with the technology, please say in the chat and we'll try to respond to you. Okay, and see quite a few answers coming up. So just as they're coming up, I'm going to just sort of summarize some of them before we go on to the next question. So I can see here some people saying validating their feelings and experiences. So making sure you treat that person in a way that you validate whatever they're feeling and you acknowledge those feelings and the experience that they're sharing. We've got here creating a safe space to talk. Listen, I can see is there. Asking them what they need in terms of help. I saw that up at the top. So what do they need? Again, I've got here empathize and hold the space for the person to express and to be there with whatever strong feelings they have. Got some practical suggestions here about perhaps encouraging them to do some breathing exercises, if that's what they want to do. And to sort of try to relax as they're experiencing those strong emotions. Someone here has said listening to them But as my friend mentioned, it's sometimes better to go to the therapist. So yes, we'll talk about that. We'll be talking about here the sort of distinction between being a first responder when somebody, you know, is traumatized or is with you or comes for you to help, and what you do as a non-professional, and at what point then you might want to refer them to a trained professional as well. I can see another response here at the bottom about listening carefully without judging. Yeah, and validating feelings. So this sort of lack of judgment is really important. Okay, so someone here at the bottom, I think, is talking about getting help from friends and taken somewhere for help. And then I think they're perhaps talking as well about the sort of longer term, about this the sort of immediate response, but there's also what the long-term healing might entail as well. And the financial support that someone's mentioned there is obviously can be quite important in the long term. Can we just scroll back up, make sure I've not missed anything? Whoever's sharing I think active listening, presence, listening, calming, breathing. Okay, express encouragement. Okay, so thank you. There's some great ideas there we'll come back to. I think we've seen everything there. So can I ask, I've put someone there responding to pain, that's Charity. Maybe you couldn't use the Mentimeter. Sorry if that's not working for you, Charity. Okay, so could I ask Mudo, I think it's you doing that, to take us to the next question on the Mentimeter. So thinking about things the other way around, what kinds of approaches do you think you should not take? So if someone is distressed, they've come to you for help, or they're experiencing trauma, they're very upset, what approaches should you not take? What should you not do in those circumstances? So again, if you could add your comments on the Mentimeter and we'll see them appear on the screen. Okay, let's give it a couple more minutes. Okay, so I'm just, as you're keeping writing, I'm just going to start summarizing a few things that are here. So I'm seeing quite a few people talking about avoiding being judgmental and pointing out that you need to avoid being judgmental both in the language and how you speak, but also your body language. So even though you don't speak, you can show quite a lot by your body language towards somebody else and the way you're looking. Got people here, a lot of people are talking about not giving them advice, not telling them what you would do, or being strong about sort of pushing them to do what you think is right for them, but to sort of listen to them. Don't talk a lot, I've got someone saying there. Not offering on the spot solutions. So someone said that there about, you know, again, just giving advice and saying, oh, you should do this, or you should do that. Not telling them how they should be feeling. And not, I think someone above had said sort of, you know, not asking them to explain why this happened to them, not asking them for explanations, and also not suggesting to them what they did wrong or right, or what you would have done, and not imposing your viewpoint, basically. Non-judgment, maintaining confidentiality. So perhaps reassuring somebody of confidentiality and maintaining that. Got Dennis has put in the chat, and I can see that also here, about avoid victimizing the victim. Okay, so avoid making them in any way feel responsible or bad about what's happened to them. So not blaming the victim. Can you scroll up a little bit again? I think there were a few things I missed at the top. Don't talk about your own experiences yet. So don't start to take away the attention from them and make it about you. Don't play down their trauma. The impossible promise, that's an interesting one. So again, in listening to them, and then, as we'll discuss in a moment, possibly talking to them about what further support they could get, we shouldn't be making impossible promises. So if in the context there is no local counsellor within reach, we shouldn't be saying or promising that kind of support if that's not available. So being kind of realistic about what's available as well. I think that's mostly, let's go down, yeah, just go down a little bit. Yep, just not to offer solutions. Yeah, okay. So I think we've got a good idea here of some of the things what not to do in these circumstances. Thank you very much for participating. And if we could just return to the main slides, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Just give us a moment while we try to get the main slides back on the screen. Mudo Rita, I'm not seeing the slides. I'm just wondering. Are we able to get the slides back up? Rita, I think you're sharing the slides. Are you, let me know in the chat if you're having a challenge, because I can probably just share my version of them briefly if you're having a challenge with sharing them with your laptop. Okay, I'm going to share. Just give us 1 second. I think we're having a technical issue, so I'm just going to find my set of slides. Give me 1 second, and I'm going to share with you, just so we get the main slides back up. Okay, can I just check in that those slides are visible? Would somebody just let me know in the chat whether those slides are visible?
Yes, Lyndsay, your slides are visible. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Right, so just sort of, first of all, to frame the rest of this webinar, what do we mean by psychological first aid? So essentially, in a situation, as we just discussed, when someone is suffering from severe stress or trauma, the research that we have shows that some of the key things they need in a situation, as many of you have mentioned, are safety, calm, compassion, non-judgment, connectiveness, personal efficacy, so some sense of kind of agency, and some sense of hope. So psychological first aid is actually an approach which is rooted in evidence and rooted in research. And what it involves is comforting someone who is in distress, helping them to feel safe and calm, assessing their needs and their concerns that they're expressing, intervening as necessary to protect them from further harm, and providing emotional support to that person, helping to provide immediate basic needs, and listening to people, as many of you shared just now, the meant to mean, to listen to people but not pressurizing them to talk, and then helping people to obtain the information, the services, and the social support that they may need. So that's a sort of basic overview of what psychological first aid is. And obviously, in thinking about when to provide this, we need to sort of be aware of what the signs are of stress, anxiety, and trauma. So this slide just puts some of those signs down in one place, which I'm sure many of you are aware because of your work. So if people are suffering stress, anxiety, and trauma, there may be emotional signs, and they may be able to detect those. And by the way, you can also apply this approach to yourself. So you can apply this to yourself and you can apply it to others. Okay, so emotional signs may include anxiety, guilt, anger, sadness, numbness, loss of meaning, feeling of emptiness. They're all signs of stress, anxiety, or trauma. At a sort of more mental or cognitive level in your brain, in your sort of thinking brain, it could result in a loss of concentration, confusion, difficulties in making decisions, and your thoughts feel disorganized, for example, or thoughts are intruding without you feeling like you can control them. Physically, stress, anxiety, and trauma can also affect your body. So you may have an increased heart rate, sleeping problems, aches, pains, muscle tremors, a loss of energy, and maybe just an inability to rest and relax or sleep. And socially, in yourself or in others, you may see signs such as people taking risks, things like undereating or overeating, increased intake of substances like alcohol and cigarettes. You may find people being aggressive, but also sort of withdrawing themselves and being socially isolated. So these are some of the signs that we're looking out for, both in ourselves, if we're going to use this approach with ourselves, but also with others around us as well, our colleagues, our clients, our friends. So most of the guides on psychological first aid, and there are some resources at the end of these slides, and we will email some of these resources to you afterwards, but most approaches tend to use something like this. This is kind of a 4-step approach, which, as I said, can be applied to ourselves, others, and in a one-on-one or a group setting. So firstly, looking. So that's looking for those signs of stress and anxiety in ourselves or others. So that's kind of creating the basic awareness that there is a problem, that someone is having a problem, whether ourselves or others. Listening. So listening to the warning signs from those signs we said, but also listening to the person expressing themselves and trying to identify their feelings and their needs, trying to be really attentive to what those are. And then at some point then linking them. So we will be, as we'll talk about in a minute, responding to their immediate needs in that first situation, but then also linking them to appropriate resources to meet those needs. Okay, so it could be a self-care plan, or it could be resources in the community if they exist. In the longer term, which some of you were referring to also in your answers, it's then about supporting that person to develop coping strategies, and also about sort of providing resources as well that they may need. So we're the Prevention Collaborative, and many of you who are here today, you work on prevention, you may also work on response. And we all say, and we all know that prevention and response are linked, but particularly thinking now about, well, why is this approach important in prevention work? Well, in prevention work, we're doing various things. Some of us are researching about gender-based violence. Some of us are designing, implementing, and evaluating programs. And in all of those situations, even if it's prevention programs and research to feed into a prevention program, there are many, many times when we may encounter a person in distress. This person may be a survivor or a non-survivor, a colleague, or even a perpetrator, and they may be of any gender or age. In terms of those we're working with. So just a couple of examples that some of you may have experienced. A participant might become distressed during a research interview or a focus group that we're conducting as a researcher or evaluator, because something that's been asked or has been discussed has triggered the memory of their own experience of violence or someone close to them or something they've witnessed. The same may happen with a participant in one of our prevention programs. So some of you have been doing community activities and curricula with small groups or couples or adolescents. And again, a participant may be triggered in that circumstance. It may be one of our colleagues, a researcher or a practitioner. They may conduct an interview or an activity, and they also may have had experience of violence. Many of us working in this field have suffered violence ourselves or witnessed violence up close. And then also just a reminder that it doesn't necessarily have to be your experience or even your witnessing of a violent experience. It might just be the very fact of hearing a very traumatic story of someone else's violent experience that may act as a trigger. And that's what we call vicarious trauma. So it's critical that we prepare ourselves, because of this work that we're doing, if we're working on prevention as well as response, with the basic skills to support someone in distress. And how the very first person responds, and often we are not a qualified person, how we respond in that situation can make a significant difference to the person who is suffering. So just finally, before I pass over and take my slides down and pass over to Pauline and Jacki, what is it not? Well, it's not something, as I think you've heard, that only professionals do. At the same time, we are not going to pretend or try to be professional counsellors or therapists if that's not what we are. Pauline and Jacki are, they're going to talk to you next, but I'm not, and many of us here are not. It's not about encouraging a detailed discussion of the event that caused the distress. It's not asking someone to analyze what's happened to them or really pressing for details about it. And it's not pressurizing someone to share their feelings and reactions to an event either. So that's what it's not. And as we go through the kind of case studies that follow, hopefully you'll see some of the ways in which this plays out in practice, and then we'll have a chance to share your experiences as well. So I'm going to just stop sharing my slides, and I'm going to try, hopefully the other slides can come back up, and we'll better hand over to Pauline and to Jacki as well. Oh, Pauline, you're on mute. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. My name is Pauline, and I work with Nama Wellness Community Center. We are in Uganda, in a district called Mukono. We are a community-based organization, though registered as NGO in 2018. We work within the community, trying to serve the community and meet their health needs right within a home environment. Our facility runs a private not-for-profit clinic, which is located at the headquarters on Kayunga Road. And our private not-for-profit clinic is rated as Health Center 3, that is a level 3 health facility. Currently our clientele is 50,000 clients per month across all the 4 pillars that we work in. And our 4 pillars include working with community health workers who are also peer counselors in the community to women and girls who are suffering from gender-based violence. And we also do community outreaches to the last mile populations in the rural communities where we go. Our community health nurse goes out there and attends to the health needs of those far and remote areas, including the village health teams who accompany her to those areas and offer some support during the community outreaches. And we also work together with government health facilities in the sub-county. We do capacity building for government health facilities so that they're able to identify some of the health challenges that the community is facing and be able to support them by attending to them. And some of these are actually cases related to gender-based violence, and therefore they are able to make appropriate referrals to the sub-county where we have a community development officer who attends to these cases. So that in a nutshell is what we do at Nama Wellness Community Center, which is located in Mukono district. And we work within Nama sub-county with community health who are peer counselors as they do sessions within the community. Next slide, please. So for our mental health activities, we did a community survey that was conducted within the sub-county in 2020, right at the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic in the country. And in that survey, 379 people were randomly selected and screened. And of the 379, 10.3% presented with signs and symptoms of mental illness, with 2.6 presenting with suicidal thoughts. And when we talk about symptoms of mental illness, we basically mean depression and anxiety in addition to others. And so we realized that actually out of those, 2.6 presented with suicidal thoughts, which is really very dangerous. And this prompted us to actually implement a community-based and resilient mental health project called the Resilient Project in the sub-county to respond to some of these challenges that the community members, especially the women and girls, were experiencing right at the beginning of the pandemic. And actually this moved on up to date. We are still in the community responding to their mental health needs, most especially due to COVID-19. And our goal is basically to use community health workers as the peer counselors and the community health workers work within the community with these community members, so they are able to identify with their needs and be able to respond to them effectively. So we are really very privileged to work with them. And Jacki, my colleague and friend, is going to take us through the other slides. She's right next to me. I'll just pass over the microphone to her so that she can really tell us more about mental health and how we do it in our community.
Okay. Thank you so much, Pauline, for doing that great introduction. So the best model of providing psychological first aid that we use as Nama Wellness Community Center is IPTG, which is Interpersonal Psychotherapy for Groups. It is a brief attachment focused psychotherapy that centers on solving interpersonal problems and symptomatic recovery. It happens in groups of about 10 women, maximum we do 12 clients. It focuses on relieving function, symptoms, and improving functionability, because remember, when someone is emotionally distressed, there is an incapacitation in so many spheres of function, including social functioning, occupational functioning. So this IPTG addresses current problems and relationships rather than childhood or developmental issues. So it focuses on here and now relationships. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, the principles of IPT. So IPT assumes that depression is triggered by interpersonal difficulties in one or more of the following. So that is death of a loved one. It could also be property, because much as someone happens to lose most of their most significant belongings, there is a lot that happens, and grief is one of the normal responses to sorrows and emotions and confusion after losing something. So the major goal of treatment for IPT is helping the client experience the normal grief process, letting go and moving on with life, and also re-establish social contact and resuming activities. So the next IPT problem area, is disagreements or disputes. Disagreements or disputes amongst loved ones is something that is not good because it brings emotional distress. So our major goal of treatment with IPT is to help the client decide about the relationship and also figure out what stage of the disagreement, because we have so many stages of disagreement that we actually look at as we are trying to give this mode of treatment, and also to develop new skills on how to overcome the dispute. So life change is also another IPT problem area that we look at, or actually with life change, there is an interpersonal role transition. So our major goal of treatment is to help the person find the good or the positive things with the new role that they've tried to get at that particular time, and also develop better coping strategies to handle the new role. So loneliness or social isolation is the last IPT problem area. Every person facing or undergoing depression actually suffers loneliness. So our major goal is to help this person be able to identify the circles that they can relate with and actually avoid that gap in between them, so that they can be able to harmonize with whatever is happening with them, and also build relationships for people to be able to help them overcome what they are facing. Next slide, please. Okay. The principles of IPT, thinking about events and the interpersonal events and depression, and by assisting in developing skills. Still with IPT, what we mostly look at is the interpersonal events. Those are the events that I've talked about previously, and assisting the client to be able to develop skills on how to overgo the different challenges that they are facing at that particular point in time. Like I earlier said, interpersonal psychotherapy for groups addresses current problems and relationships rather than childhood or development issues. So it's a here and now intervention. We look at what is happening to a client right now and we intervene there and then. Next slide, please. Okay, with IPT, we employ or we use the volunteers, like Pauline earlier on said it. We use the volunteers, or what we call the mental health facilitators, to implement the model. And as the facilitators or volunteers are implementing the model, there is a lot that they have to exhibit. So as the implementation is a progress or it's a success. So there is need to be active. As your counselor, you need to be active. With activeness, there is leading. You're supposed to be able to have good group cohesion for clients to be able to harmonize so well as the sessions are beginning or as the mode of treatment is beginning. You should be able to support the clients. You should be able to have a questioning ability, because questioning is good, but it depends on how you're questioning the client. You don't want to be too much, or you don't want to overly go on the client, but you need to devise ways of how you're going to question, either using open-ended or closed-ended questioning, checking understanding. Do the clients really know why they are joining therapy? You need to really check it out and know they are really joining for the right cause. And then answering depending on whatever someone has shared. So the answering has to be looked at by the counselor so that we draw up workable solutions for clients. So as a counselor, you need to be non-neutral. You need to be non-judgmental. You need to be accommodative to whatever is coming through from the clients. You need to be supportive to the clients. You need to do regular checkups. You can do phone calls. You can do home visits to the clients. You need to be empathetic. You need to put yourself in the shoes of the clients that you're actually treating. You need to calm them down, because as we are sharing through the sessions, there is what we call emotional outburst. You need to be able to calm down the clients as they are really sharing or opening up to fellow clients. So there is need for hopefulness. You need to improvise, or you need to really use hopefulness. You need to be able to encourage clients to see that they will be better and better as time goes on, though the change won't be an immediate change, but they need to be hopeful and keeping positive that something better is yet to come. Offer or ask members for opinions for change. As we shall see, when we are applying IPT, members come up with different suggestions, but you may find the different suggestions they've come up with are not workable for particular reasons, or it's for what someone has shared. So you need to let them see that there is need for us to change to another suggestion so as to be able to help out a client to go with a workable solution. Remember, as a client, you're not supposed to give them solutions however much you have a solution for that particular problem. Next slide, please. Okay, how IPT works. The central idea of IPT is psychological symptoms can be understood as response to current difficulties in everyday relationships with other people. So as we come for therapy, or as we look at these women, the clients, because it also applies with men, the way they present, the different signs and symptoms of depression they present with is a reflection of the difficulties that they are passing through at that particular point in time. So the central idea of IPT is to help the client be able to focus on what they are experiencing right now, come up with workable solutions, and be able to overcome the different life challenges they are facing at that particular point in time. Next slide, please. The 4 areas of focus of IPT, I talked about them earlier. They are 4. We have conflict in relationship, that is a source of tension and distress. We have life change, which can either be positive or negative, that can lead to emotional distress or depression. For example, a negative one could be loss of job. A positive one could be birth, which is good, but it can affect people's feelings about how they feel about themselves, the weight gain, how they're going to live up with life after giving birth. So we have grief and loss. We have social isolation or loneliness, which can arise from difficulty in starting and sustaining relationships or the social isolation. Next slide, please. The skills that we need in IPT. As counselors, as facilitators, we have different skills that we need to employ as we are executing this model. So communication is key because it helps you to be able to identify what the clients are passing through. Communication can be seen in so many ways. We have the verbal and non-verbal cues. So as we are administering this mode of treatment, what or the body language someone tries to explicit with can be actually a right way for you to know they are communicating something to you. So it is key to be able for you to have a communication analysis as you're carrying out this therapy. So decision-making is also a skill. As clients since this model is entailed on clients coming up with solutions for themselves or decisions, you should be able to look through and see that these clients are really making the right decision, much as you're not putting in what you think is right. You need to guide them on how they are going to be able to make decisions. And if decisions are not coming out, they are persons or clients in these groups that actually are much more prominent or actually can come up with solutions. Because as you administer treatment, you happen to see clients that are much more vigilant. So you try to look out for those who can really make workable solutions and also, dive in and helping a client. Stress management is also one of the skills a counselor should have. As a counselor, I remember you're listening into so many clients who have different challenges in life. So as a counselor, you need to be able to also having the ways you can manage the different forces that are coming in, because apparently you may have also passed through a certain situation. So how are you going to manage it there and then as you're in therapy? You need to be able to manage the different, forces that are coming in for you to be able to carry out IPT promptly. Then problem solving. As clients share in their different IPT challenges, you should be able to help them on how they are going to cope up with the different workable solutions that have been given out by the different clients. That is, we shall see later on how we shall be able to help the clients cope up with the solutions that the different clients have given them, and then managing solutions that are raised. As any setting or as in any group, there are different complaints that can come in. Whenever you have a group, you can't have harmony there and then all through. There are those things that arise. As a counselor, you should be able to really harmonize the group, have group cohesion, and manage the different, impunities or different challenges that are coming through. Next slide, please. The techniques that we use in all phases of approach in IPT. The first one is linking depression to event, what has happened, what the client feels. You link what the client feels at that particular point in time to what has happened, and the event to the depression. Like any other person, whenever they get a loss of, let me say, property, they get different feelings. They could be mixed feelings, the emotional outbursts, the too much worrying, the lack of sleep. So you have to relate it to the loss. So whenever a client comes in for therapy and then they have such symptoms, you have to relate and find out what happened for them to be actually behaving the way they are behaving. So you link the depression or the symptoms they are feeling to the event, and the event to the depression. That whenever someone loses something, it is okay for someone to feel the way you feel. So the next is mood rating. Mood rating is a technique that we normally use as we are doing IPT. It helps us know the burden of or the weight of the symptoms of depression someone is having. So with the mood rating, we use the burden rating scale. It is a tool that we use as we are administering IPT. It helps us know how the client is feeling, and the rating has scores. It has a score from 1 to 5. And then it helps you know how your client is and how you can intervene and help them there and then, because it's a here and now intervention. So the symptoms for a counselor to be able to carry out IPT, they need to know the symptoms of anxiety and depression at their fingertips, and also make it a point for the clients that they are treating to be able to know the symptoms of depression and anxiety. earlier on, I had to talk about the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7, because this is what we actually look at as we are trying to enroll clients for therapy, but I'll talk about it briefly later on for us to know how we can put in clients for therapy and actually pull out clients who are not fit for therapy. So decision analysis is also a technique that actually we look at as we are trying to implement the IPT model. So with decisions, clients come in with so many decisions, but the decisions that are not workable. So we need to let a client be able to choose what decision they feel will work for them rather than forcing a decision on a client. Then communication, Leon talked about communication, the verbal and non-verbal cues. You should be able to make clients be able to do what? To speak freely. They should be able to talk to you freely as a counselor or to talk to themselves as clients. The encouragement or affect, a counselor is supposed to be able to encourage the other clients. You're supposed to encourage a client however much it is not doing well. You need to encourage a client that all will be well with time. So you also need to look at the affect of the client, because affect says a lot as a counselor. Much as a client is telling you they're okay, when their affect is blunt, it's labile, it's moody, that shows there is something that is not right. That means you need to probe more. As we are probing, we are not actually forcing a lot on the client, but we really want to help out the client. Role play is good because actually it's entailed on a client, it's individual based, it's not in a group. But however, role play helps out a client to see how they're going to act out a particular scenario in case it is one that is chosen by that particular individual. It could be a case of a disagreement. Someone doesn't know how to apologize or to say a sorry. So a role play is used by the clients. You get clients to play out something or a skit that this person will look onto and also go and display or actually employ as they are trying to work on the solution they've actually chosen. Homework is given so that it can be able to help you know the level or the progress this person is at. Because the moment someone gives in a suggestion, someone takes it on wholly, that means we need to give homework and actually come back and see with the suggestion we were given, were we able to yield results or we were not. Skills building is something that is really so good for clients, because with skills building, we are able to learn different techniques of IPT, because IPT is something that changes here and now. So different skills have to be emerged, and we have to actually learn the different skills as counselors when we are doing IPT. Next slide, please. Next slide. The details of IPT, the skills. As a counselor, you need to have the skills of counseling where we have empathy, where we have confidentiality, being non-judgmental. We have strategies. As we are also doing IPT, we have strategies as counselors. We need to strategize and see the different strategies that we are employing. Are they really going to help us have high healing rates, or we are going to have clients that are not going to be healing? The moods assessment, this is key as we are carrying out IPT, because it will really help us know how our clients are feeling every now and then. The burden skills, here I said we use a tool called the burden rating scale to know the weight of symptoms of depression a client is having at that particular point in time. Self-awareness of triggers, you really need to know the different triggers that your clients really have in group, because you have about 10 clients or 12 clients in a group. So you need to be aware of the triggers that each particular client is having at that point in time. Setting goals of members. Members have different reasons to ask why they join groups for IPT, but as a client, you need to make sure they set realistic goals. As someone comes in for therapy, you need to know that goal that is making them come in for therapy. Is it realistic or not realistic? Because some come in with monetary gains, and that is not a realistic goal. Okay, next slide, please. Still to add on the IPT techniques, IPT is a structure that is going to be talked about how we actually how we enroll clients for therapy. It's structured. It has a duration. It has a duration of 8 weeks. And in the 8 weeks, that means we sit once, like in a week. We have one session every week. And with that one session, it runs for 1.5 hours. So with IPT, there is talking, because with talking, there is sharing, because also sharing is an IPT technique. So if there is no active participation, that means someone is not going to be helped. Clients are not going to be helped. Setting goals, it helps someone or a client be able to know the reason for joining therapy. The moment you have a goal for joining therapy, it will help you know on what you're going to be derived to. If you don't have a goal, that means we won't know your intention for joining therapy. So we'd rather know your goal so as to be able to help you with that particular goal. Homework is key. I talked about it earlier on. Sharing is also key, because with sharing, that is when we can know your problem area. Supporting one another is one of the modes that are really encouraged. Confidentiality is one of the greatest rules of IPT, because different people share different life pro challenges. So we need to harmonize as a group and have confidentiality as one of the greatest rules for our group. Attendance is key, because without regular attendance, that means we won't get good healing rates. IPT is a top therapy. Next slide, please. Okay, let Pauline come in and talk about the implementation, then I'll talk about the different tools that we use in IPT.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Jackie. And I'll take you through this slide of implementation of interpersonal psychotherapy for groups. That's what we are calling IPT-G in community. So what happens is that the community volunteers, whom we call VHTs, in Uganda, these are community health workers and they are village health teams. That acronym VHT is Village Health Team, who is a CHW or community health worker and works in the community close to the community members. So we had a training where we trained the VHTs and we trained the facilitators, like the coordinators and the other team members within the organization. So we trained the team for about 7 days, and some went in a training for about 5 days. Yeah, so they were trained to be able to do community mobilization so that they can get as many women and girls as possible enrolled into therapy, and then be able to do pre-assessment and be able to do pre-grouping, and then of course start the therapy. So what happens here is that before the women are enrolled into therapy, the community health workers or the VHTs, the village health teams, go into the community within the villages where they live and make a mobilization of women and girls. And when they are mobilized, then they are formed into groups. And when they are in groups, then a pre-assessment is done to determine whether they are depressed, whether anxious, or they have any other psychiatric conditions or undergoing gender-based violence. So when that is identified, then they are pre-grouped. So the pre-grouping may be more than 12, because in a session, an ideal session always has about 8 to 12 women or girls. But then in pre-grouping, you may actually have like 20, 16, or basically more than 12. And as you enter into the initial phase for therapy, you'll go in with the many that you've pre-grouped for the first 3 sessions. But you realize that within those first 3 sessions, actually the women, some of them keep falling off, change of residence, or husband has refused me to join or to be part of the therapy because he doesn't understand it, or some are caught up with other duties, so they are unable to attend. So by the time you get into the 4th session, you realize that you have about 10 to 12 or even less women, less than 8 or 7 women in the group. So those few that have remained in the group, most times around 8 to 10 women, remain and form a solid group that continues up to the 6th week and actually up to 8 weeks. So you do the working phase of therapy from 4 weeks to, from the 4th week to the 6th week, that is 4 to 6 session, and then you enter into termination. So by the time you enter into termination, you're able to tell that actually of my 12 groups of women, all of them probably have healed from depression, because there's an assessment tool that is administered to identify that, or to assess them to really understand whether they've healed or they still need more interventions or further interventions, probably in health facilities or referrals for gender-based violence management in organizations that are doing that, or those who are suicidal, who still have suicidal tendencies, are also referred for management in a health facility, or sometimes in other organizations that are within the country. So basically for IPTG, or interpersonal psychotherapy for groups, the sessions run for 8 weeks. Those are the 8 sessions, and those are the steps that we take when we are running these sessions. So basically that's what happens. And we've realized that our challenge here is that most times, most of the women we see in these groups are victims of gender-based violence. Some are survivors. Some are actually really overwhelmed with the situation in the community. And our challenge has always been referral. To whom do we refer these women? Most of the referral centers are in the capital city, which is quite a distance from where our organization is. And therefore it becomes very challenging for the women to keep traveling to the city and back. And so there is an interruption. Sometimes they drop off and they're like, I cannot continue because the cost of transport is high. But what we do is we ride into the existing structures. We ride on the existing structures we have in the sub-county, like the community development officer, who is within our sub-county, and therefore we make referrals to the community development officer, and is able to really make calls or link these women into care. So with gender-based violence, our challenge is still referrals to treatment sites, or sites where they can be managed and taken care of, because some of those issues cannot be handled in the sessions, within the sessions. So I thank you so much, and we can move on to the next slide, to Lyndsay, or probably Jackie can add something if she's still interested, but the next person to come on board is Lyndsay.
Great. Thanks so much to both Pauline and Jackie. I mean, a really interesting model of sort of community level response and meeting sort of mental health needs at the community level. So thanks for sharing. And I think I'm gonna put a little question for you for later before I start mine. I think I'd be really interested when we get to the Q&A, just to, you know, I obviously, as you say, when you have GBV survivors who have needs, you're trying to refer them, but the services are quite far away. So when we get to the questions, I'd be really interested in anything you have to say about, is there something specific you do in your groups where there are GBV survivors amongst others in terms of meeting their specific needs, or if they disclose in a group setting? So is there anything you do at your level in terms of your the counselling you offer and your facilitators offer that's sort of different because there are GBV survivors in the group? So I'd love to come back to that at the end. So maybe you can put the question down, Pauline and Jackie, and come back to that. That would be super interesting. So I'm just going to share my slides again and just quite quickly take you through another brief case study that might resonate with some of you, and then we're going to move to some questions. So I'm hoping that my slides are going to share. Just a second. Okay, are those visible? Could somebody just shout out at me if they're visible again? Tanya?
Yes, Lyndsay.
Perfect.
They're
Thanks.
visible.
Thank you. So I'm going to give another case study, which is in a way a completely different context, but I hope it's one that many of you here might be able to relate to, because I'm pretty sure that lots of people who are participating have given some kind of training or teaching around gender-based violence, whether that's training facilitators to do a program, or you may have even been doing direct training or facilitation in communities with community members. And so my case study is actually from here where I'm sitting today at Sussex University in the UK. But what I'm going to talk about, I think, has a lot of relevance for those of us who are doing any kind of teaching and training on GBV or relating to, or when there are GBV survivors in the room. So just as brief context, I'm in the UK context, and the research amongst students show that 1 in 5 of our students that we teach here in the UK at the university have a diagnosed mental health problem, but many more have undiagnosed mental health problems. The most common issues are anxiety and depression, but also in our classrooms, and that's whether we're teaching about gender-based violence or war and conflict or whatever, there are survivors and witnesses of violence and injustice. Okay, there are students dealing with loss and grief, those who are worried about money, those who are worried about others that they love or care for. And sometimes in our classrooms, the same as in our training rooms, there'll be students and participants at risk of self-harm, being harmed themselves, or maybe even of harming somebody else. And also when we're teaching or we're training, some of our participants or students may become distressed within the classroom because of something that we discuss or watch in the classroom or the training room, or because of their life outside and other things that are worrying them. Some may disclose their mental health status or trauma to us, either in a group session or in the break or afterwards. And some may exhibit obvious signs of trauma. And this particularly happens when I'm teaching over a number of weeks to university students. Sometimes people's participation will go down, they may be absent. And I may also detect some of the physical verbal signs that we talked about earlier. So that's the context. And I'm teaching, in particular, most of my teaching here is a master's degree on gender violence and conflict. So this whole degree is sensitive. We talk about gender, sex and violence, about the forms and causes and consequences of gender violence. We look at how gender violence intersects with violence based on race and disability. We look at war and conflict. We look at kind of sexuality, sexual and reproductive health, and violence is associated with that. So everything as well as looking at kind of mobilizations and initiatives against violence, but everything I teach is sensitive. We have about 20 to 40 students a year. About a third of those are from the UK, but the other 2/3 are international students from every continent around the world. So I have lots of different people from different countries with very different kind of understandings and experiences as well that they bring into the room. Some of those are young students coming direct from their first degree, so they're in their early 20s, but some are older students who have maybe worked many years as professionals, either voluntary, and some are very experienced practitioners. So, you know, in the last few years, I've had students from actually Uganda, from Kenya, from Nigeria, from India, from Latin America, who themselves have been practitioners in this field. And as I've been teaching this over several years, I've come to realize that well over half of the students in my classroom every year have a direct personal experience of surviving gender violence themselves. And most of the rest have witnessed gender violence and injustice up close. So that's the kind of context. And as I think most of us here know, we are often motivated to do this work or to study these issues because of our own experiences. So I'm just going to ask people to put stuff in the chat because of time, but I just wondered if anyone wanted to put anything in the chat quickly around listening, because we're going to talk a little bit about what I do. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do. But one of the key things is active listening, and we've talked about listening a bit, and Pauline and Jacki have mentioned this as well. Would anyone like to just put any quick comments in the chat about what might be active listening and what is not active listening? So I'm just going to look out quickly in the chat to see if anything is coming up. If not, I'm going to move on because of time. I'm not seeing anything coming just yet. So because of time, I'm going to move forward, but I'd be really interested in the sharing at the end of this session from the participants. But when we're doing this, whether as a professional, like what Pauline and Jacki were saying, or as a non-professional, but a first responder like myself and like many of you, we need to sort of actively listen. And I'm already seeing, actually, thank you, Delene and Patricia. So Delena said, reflecting back on what you've heard. Patricia said, rephrasing what someone is saying to show your understanding. Yes, both very accurate. So You know, we're going to actively concentrate on the person using our body language and our eye contact to show them that we're listening. So yeah, Anna's talking about non-verbal expressions being very important as well, to show we are listening and we're attentive. Not interrupting, assure and not trying to assure them in everything will be all right. So I think there's a balance between what Pauline and Jacki were saying about being hopeful, but also not just saying, oh, you'll be all right, or it'll be all right tomorrow. So not being dismissive. So it's kind of striking a balance there. As people have said in the box, using short affirmations to encourage them and show your understanding. So you can reflect back, but also just, you know, just small prompts to show people your understanding. So Sheppy is also saying, without interruption and giving appropriate feedback. Yeah, so thank you, Sheppy, in the chat as well. So taking time to listen when people describe what happened. So telling their own story with just some small prompts from you already helps people to understand what's happened to them, and eventually is part of that process of accepting and moving forward. I say moving forward, not moving on. Because sometimes you can never quite move on, but what you can do is move forward. So these are kind of active listening, but it's also useful to say what active listening is not as well. So on this page, I'm not necessarily going to read all of them out, but I think probably all of us as human beings can see things that have been done to us, or maybe we have done with other people, even though we've been very well-meaning. So giving advice and fixing, so telling other people what we think they should do, analyzing and diagnosing and evaluating, storytelling. So sometimes, oh, that happened to me, and yes, and yes. And so actually what you're doing is taking the focus away from them and their story and telling a story of yourself or somebody else you know. Feeling sorry for somebody, that sort of over pitiful and sympathy, and sort of sharing your own feelings. Of course, you have feelings about what they're saying, but this is really about listening to them and their feelings. Shutting someone down, so that can be about discounting their feelings or shifting them in a different direction, changing the subject, interrogating them, commiserating. Maybe someone's telling you the story about a bad conflict they had with somebody, but you should just listen to them rather than saying, oh yes, that person's awful. So let them tell it in their words. And then sometimes what we call one-upping, where we might say, oh yes, well that happened to me, but it was much, much worse. So that's a very quick summary of what's deflective listening, but hopefully we can all understand sort of, we've had that done to us, or we've maybe done that and afterwards thought that wasn't the right way to handle that. So just briefly, I'm just got 3 quick slides about how I prepare for teaching and training, whether that's in the classroom here at Sussex or whether it's doing training out in the field as a practitioner. One thing here at Sussex, and you may also have this information before your training, is that we do sometimes have information about the students or the participants before the training, about their particular needs or situations. If that's the case, then you can often read that information beforehand so you're aware, and also contact them perhaps to say, I'm aware, I've read your memo, or I've read the information you sent me, and just so they are aware that you know what their situation is. Ensure you're familiar with referral mechanisms and services that are available in your context. Another thing that can be done in our training or teaching is adding content warnings. We may have something printed out, or we may have slides, or even in the session when we'll talk about that in a minute when we're there, let people know when something that's going to be a difficult subject or a difficult thing to watch is going to come up, just so you're giving people that chance to prepare. And on the whole, I encourage attendance at sessions, but I make it clear that participants can step out, disengage by maybe putting music headphones on at any time they want, or come and talk to me in the break or afterwards. And this is because my whole course is sensitive. So if I was saying, oh, don't come because it's sensitive, then I couldn't even teach anything. And that'll be the same with much of the training that people in the room here do as well. Inside the classroom, a key thing is about, and our training room, a key thing is not talking about survivors and those affected by violence as if they're somewhere else, okay? Because always amongst us in any social group, there are survivors, okay? So don't talk about them as if they're other people. Acknowledge there will be survivors and witnesses of violence amongst us in the space in which we are training and teaching and working together. As I said, let people know if you're about to show difficult or sensitive or potentially triggering materials. After sensitive materials have been shared, leave some time, okay, and acknowledge the material, acknowledge the emotions. So people are going to find it very difficult to watch some materials, but maybe that's essential to their training, but let them know that it's difficult to watch and normalize those emotions they may feel, upset or sad at what they have seen as well. Allowing space for sharing of individual experiences. So some people will want to share individual experiences that relate to what you're discussing. So allow them to share if they wish to. Never force anyone to share, but some people may want to, and validate and do the active listening in the class. And then if someone has shared something traumatic, make sure you leave time in the break or afterwards just to check in with that person. And if they want to talk to you, and you kind of acknowledge them as well for the sharing that they have done. And then, you know, when that disclosure happens, don't try to silence it. It's very difficult if someone has the courage to disclose something traumatic in the space where you are, like an experience of gender violence. You don't want to close that down. So somehow you need to balance things where you're listening to that person in a group context, but you're also aware that other people are listening and other people may also be distressed by what they're hearing. So you can employ all of that active listening that we talked about. Keep asking them what they need. As Pauline and Jacki were saying, do they need to take a break or follow up? Again, don't try to probe or offer advice, but also remember to acknowledge to other participants that this was likely very difficult for them to hear, and give a few moments for everyone to have a breather. And as I said, make sure you check in with the person afterwards who has disclosed or shared their story to see what follow-up they need, and thank them for their courage in sharing as well, just so you don't leave them. And finally, sometimes it happens to me, and it may happen to you in your work. Somebody may come to you one-on-one. It may be somebody you've trained or a colleague. It happens to me in my office hour at the university. So again, there we've got, you know, we've not got everybody else to think about. We've still got to think about, where are we? Are we in a safe, private place? The active listening, paying attention, that checking in with their understanding, keep asking them what they need now, and also be clear about what you can and can't do, especially if, like me, you have some training, but you are not a trained professional, okay? And then letting them know what services and support are available, but also ensure you're getting consent for any follow-up action. So let them know what's there and ask them what they want to do, and if they want support to access those services. Here at the university, we have one exception to that situation. If we risk that we assess that somebody, or that the person themselves or someone else close to them is at risk of imminent harm, we will do an immediate referral in that circumstance. And we'll make that clear in the conversation, that if we assess that there is that risk, that we will refer. We don't have a law about mandatory reporting here at my university, but we do have this exception that if someone is at imminent risk of harm, we will then do an immediate referral. Okay, I'm going to stop there and just ask some questions for the discussion. We've got about 15 minutes left. So there's opportunity to answer the Q&A in the box, some of the questions you've asked in the box, but also for you to unmute your microphone and share. I'm going to hand back to my colleague Lena, but some questions that I had for you is just asking you, does this resonate with your experience working on GBV, whether you're a researcher or an activist or a practitioner? Do you have any examples of your own to share, or any tips? Can you imagine, if you haven't already, applying some of this in practice, even if you're not a professional like myself, but you are in a situation where these kind of things do happen? So I'm going to stop sharing and hand back to Lena, who I believe is going to manage the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Lyndsay, and thank you, Pauline and Jacki, for that quite elaborate presentations and sharing with us your experiences at your workplaces, both in the wellness center and in the university. It was quite interesting to listen to how this approach can be used in various contexts. And I was just seated there imagining how you have also gone through this in other various, at home with friends, especially the active listening component, Lyndsay. That's something I think many of us still struggle with. There's been a few questions in the chat box. Lyndsay's questions, Lyndsay, maybe you should have left those on the screen so that we encourage people to use the chat box to just have a conversation around some of those interesting questions that you've asked. Maybe just put them back. And then I'll just, with the next few minutes remaining, I'll just ask one of the questions that is yet to be answered from the chat box, and open up the floor for anyone who would like to ask additional questions for the next few minutes. So we had a question for Chelsea that she was interested to find out, how do you handle cases of clinical depression? I think this is to Jacki and Pauline. How do you handle cases of clinical depression or connect people to clinical services when you need them? And to just add a question, to add to that, Jacki and Pauline, I would also like to follow up with a question to your team, just to hear more about the context you work in. It sounds like you have professional counselors. I don't know if you have other cadre of staff that you work with, and how do you manage to train for PFA in particular, the psychological first aid, which doesn't, as we had required people to be specialists to be able to perform? How do you separate that training with your teams and the specific training that you were talking about with your IPTG intervention? Is there a different skill set required? Who do you recruit for PFA? And is there a particular curriculum for that? And then my question to Lyndsay is, Lyndsay, it was quite interesting to hear how you do this in the universities, and in particular when you're doing a sensitive topic. And many of us who are attending this session really are, I think, interact in different settings, either in conferences or facilitation with, you know, audiences that sometimes could require or break down. I've had a situation where you're facilitating and someone inboxes you and says, I'm distressed. Lyndsay, my question to you is, how do you handle this on a virtual platform? Is it the same skill set that we are seeing here on face-to-face, or is there something else we need to do when we're in a space where we can't see or we can't actually interact in physical manner with the individual? So those three questions will start us off. I can see people still asking. Please keep your questions short so that we can get more questions answered. Over to you, Pauline or Jacki, then to Lyndsay.
All right, thank you everyone, and thank you, Lina, for those questions. I will start with the first question Lyndsay asked about how we support our clients or the survivors and victims of gender-based violence. So what we do is that we work with our community health workers. They're the ones who identify some of these cases from the community. And the first thing is to create a safe environment for the survivor or the victim. And most times some of these perpetrators are actually the partners, like intimate partner violence. So what we do is we bring the partner on board. We involve him in counseling depending on the severity. We involve him in the counseling, and we involve him in ensuring that that home is safe of domestic violence or gender-based violence. And in case that fails, then we hand that case over to the community development officer, who then of course proceeds to the police. So we try to use the local community leadership in handling some of these cases within the community, and those who need clinical interventions are brought to the health center for care, and then later on discharged, but while the community health workers are actually managing the environment within the household. And in case we fail with that, then the community development officer actually takes it up and involves the police, and then we try to see if there are other organizations out there that we can link this person to. Then the other question is about the curriculum, the training for the peer counselors. So IPTG is, you don't have to be a trained counselor for like 3 years or something like that. What we do is we use social workers who are trained together with the community health workers. Those who are really very interested, because we try to use community health workers who are very interested in implementing the IPTG. So the social workers are trained, and the social workers then support the community health workers within the community. During the sessions, the social workers who have been trained together with them anyway, support them, go with them to the community when they are carrying out the sessions for the first few days and weeks, or the first sessions, really, they are always there on the ground to ensure that these volunteers or the village health teams are doing the right thing. But then the social workers also do the same. They also run groups. They have their group sessions where they run groups and improve on their skills and ability to be able to handle the sessions at community level, as well as support or mentor and coach the village health teams who have undergone a 5-day or 7-day training with technical people from Strong Minds Uganda. So they are the ones who do that training. They have a curriculum for that training. They do that training and then support the entire organization in ensuring that the services that are being offered in the community is ideal. Then someone asked, is IPTG similar to group counseling? So for IPTG, it's not similar to group counseling, because for IPTG, the groups come up with solutions. They share their experiences and then come up with solutions to those challenges that are coming up within the groups. And then the volunteer or the peer counselor or the social worker is just a facilitator, just stands by to facilitate and guide the discussions. Whereas in group counseling, we all know what happens is that you sit and then you have one counselor who is there offering counseling, let's say maybe for pre-ARVs. You have one counselor and is counseling a group of clients who are ready to start at, or who are undergoing, or who are survivors, or who are suffering in the community there from different other issues. So one counselor stands and sits with a group and starts guiding and leading them and all that offers. Generally, the counselor is the overall person there. But for us in IPTG, it is the groups. They identify those challenges, they share those challenges, and then come up with solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pauline. I'll go ahead and let Lyndsay then come in with a few responses just because of time. Lyndsay?
Hi, yes. So first of all, Lena, in response to your question, yes, it's been quite challenging to do this work, especially during COVID, because all of us have to work virtually. And I think many of us are now offering online training in our online teaching. So a couple of things I've been doing, and I'm not claiming to have all the answers, so would love to hear from others as well. So everything from using on Zoom, using breakout spaces to allow people to talk in very small groups quite frequently and often to pair up. So sometimes I'm doing training over a period of weeks, as some of the courses that we do at the collaborative. So as people get to know each other, sometimes I'm sort of suggesting that people can kind of buddy up with each other, and then there'll be time at the beginning and the middle and the end of the session to buddy up and go off into breakout rooms and just check in with each other, because people sometimes feel more comfortable about doing that in a small space. Sometimes I've been encouraging where we're sort of doing teaching or training with students who might live together or be around the corner, and maybe under COVID they could be with one other person or whatever, or someone in, if we're training people all over the world, maybe there's somebody else from their office together. So again, trying to encourage people maybe to join the training in a pair, or there's somebody else physically in their environment that again, they can kind of check in and buddy up. Another thing has been around referrals. So I've done sort of two things there. One is sort of around virtual referral services. So here in Sussex, our counselling service, the local services in my town went online, around. So I would have all that information available as well for virtual referrals. But sometimes when I've been training with people across the world, I've asked people to come along with information to look before they join at what the referral mechanisms are locally if they don't know that. So they submit that to us. And so we know and they know if something happens to them, where they could go for support locally where they're based. So they're just a couple of things that I have tried. I'd be interested to know for others as well. And then briefly, I saw Patricia put a question in the chat about, when someone is disclosing their trauma or their story in a group space, is it okay to ask them if they want to continue privately? I mean, yes, Patricia, I'd say it is. I think it's a balance, and it's really hard. We've got like an hour and a half to get through a lot of stuff in our training, and then somebody discloses. Okay, so I think it's that balance between not closing them down if they've chosen to speak out in a group space, but equally sort of, so letting them speak, but also saying, I just want to check in with you. Would you like to continue to talk here for a few moments? Or would you like to take this into a private space? We can meet in a break, or we can talk afterwards. So you sort of give them that option. And obviously it's very difficult when you get in a situation where someone is doing a long disclosure. So it's really about checking in them and saying, do you think, would you be willing, so let them disclose, would you be willing for us to talk about this in the break? Or would you be willing to follow up with me? So not closing them down, but also giving them that option as well. But it's a hard judgment to make. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lyndsay, Pauline, and Jacki, for those quite comprehensive responses. And I can see many people saying they've learned a lot. I can see Chelsea, thank you for your feedback regarding what she does in online training, saying that she sometimes asks the participants to stay back and do what she's calling office hours, and have she could have one-on-one follow-up with the participants who need to talk. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. There's been a lot to discuss in this 1 hour, 30 minutes. Evidently, this is a session that required more time. Please feel free to continue the conversation with us online through any of our platforms, but you can also write to us direct if you had any question that you feel was not responded to during these sessions, and we'll get back to you. We can also link you up to the speakers that spoke today. A round of applause to Jacki and Pauline for sharing your work with the IPTG approach, and to Lyndsay with your approach in the university. We've learned a lot today, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. You can stay connected with us through our various social media platforms as we have them on screen, and we look forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Bye-bye.